Hello, this is the recap of Season 4 of Grimm, Episode 5, called Cry Luison, that aired on November 21st. So this episode picked up right where the last one left off. Elizabeth and Monroe and Rosalie came over to Nick and Juliet's and they were like, hey, we figured out a way for you to get your Grimm powers back, but it requires Juliet to do something. Juliet gets kind of standoffish at this point, and she's like, what do you mean? What do I have to do? And, do what Adeline did? Seriously? Like, what? And, she's crossing her arms and she's rolling her eyes. Elizabeth and Monroe and Rosalie are all trying to, mitigate it, saying, oh, it's not that bad. You just gotta drink a potion and have sex with Nick, but you'll look like Adeline. And Trouble is just there pointing out obvious things, like, well, yeah, she's not gonna look like herself, and you just gotta get it done. Just saying. And Nick is completely adamant about it. He's like, no, we are not doing that. That is too traumatic. We're not putting my girlfriend through that. No way in hell. Once Juliet kind of calms down, she's like, well, maybe we should consider it, seeing as this is the only way to get your Grimm powers back. And as we know, before she had gone to Monroe and Rosalie and was like, don't try, because I think we should at least see how this normal life affects us, and if it's better or worse than being a Grimm. So that happens at the beginning of the episode, and then the rest of the episode is basically that question hanging over our heads. But we'll get back to that. And so Elizabeth is just like, you know what? You do what you do. If you don't want to try this, I can't do anything else. I'm done. I can't help you anymore. And so she goes over to her son's house, Sean Renard, and she sets up this new fancy condo on the edge of town where he will be safe. And, she makes him Volga, and, it's kind of like a good mother-son thing. She finds out that Kelly Burkhart has her granddaughter, and she is determined to find. So while the main action of the story is happening, we also have Adelind in Austria. So Adelind is being tortured by Victor in Victor's castle, and we know that it's this guy who gave her something to eat, and she's roaming the castle, apparently, and she's having these wild hallucinations all over the place, and she's trying to find her baby, and, she sees the baby, which is obviously a hallucination because she's not there, she's with Kelly, and the baby turns into a pig, and then she can't open doors, and she's following herself around the castle like a Scooby-Doo episode where, they run into doors and then she comes out another door and going up and down stairs that aren't there, and then she's falling. It turns out that this was all in her mind because it's a torture cell for Hex and Beasts, and it turns out it worked because she agrees to tell Victor all that he needs to know. So, Josh, do you guys remember Josh? Who is the son of the late Grimm from The Inheritance, that episode back in Season 3. They found his key in his cane after he died. So Josh takes his father's ashes home, and turns out the Hundjäger are there waiting for him, because they have been tracking his father, and they're trying to get his key, which they don't know that Nick has. So Josh, he finds his house trashed. The Hundjäger start chasing him, and he throws his father's ashes at them because that's all he can do. And he tries to run, and he calls Nick. He's like, I don't know what to do. Where am I supposed to go? Nick's just like, Hundjäger are after you. They're not going to stop. You got to get out of there. So he gets on a bus, and we're all suspecting he's going to Portland because where else is he going to go? So because Nick's not a Grimm anymore, Trouble has been, taking the brunt of all the Vesson Grimm duties, and so Bud comes over, supposedly needing a Grimm's help, and it's like, oh, kind of awkward, Nick can't help me, I actually need Trouble. Turns out it's about Nick, because ice beavers are blabbermouths, and so word gets around that, Nick's not a Grimm anymore, Monroe and Rosalie's wedding, this all happened, and, this big guy, this Klaus-Strike, which is, remember, a really shady alley cat, type Vesson, saying, I'm going to teach Nick a lesson. And so Trouble has to go with Bud and find Joe, the ice beaver who blabbed to him, find Shaw, this really big guy, and, threaten him. She has her machete, and she slices his throat to give him a warning. She's like, I should have cut off his head. This is not over. So it's kind of foreshadowing more Vesson coming in the future. So the title of this episode is Cry Luison. And, that sounds like a really weird title, what does that mean? But it turns out it's actually a play on the phrase cry wolf, because Luison turns out is a type of wolf. This South American family, I think they're from Brazil. It's Ava and her husband Gabriel, and, they're living in this big fancy house, and she is terrified of this wolf that comes at her. He comes out at night, dressed in a suit, with a glass of scotch, and tries to tempt her into doing things, and it's really just kind of terrifying her. He pretends to be charming, but she knows that he wants something from her, or he's gonna hurt her, and when she's in the hospital, she tells the detectives as much. The wolf, it seems, is one of those classic Grimm commentaries on the nature of man, and it's like, well, he can pretend to be suave and charming, but really he's just greedy and he's trying to manipulate you, which is basically what husbands and men do, so it's pretty, interesting. But Detective Burkhardt and Griffin realize a wolf. Bam! It's Vesson. It's also interesting because Sergeant Wu is the one who tells them about the wolf, and he's just like, you know what? I'm just gonna believe anything these days. Because he actually went to Captain Renard to tell him, I'm having suspicions about all this crazy stuff that these two detectives are doing, and they're housing a criminal in their house who apparently has a machete and has books on all this stuff. And Renard warns the detectives, Wu was on the prowl, so I don't want him to know anything more than he does now, so just keep him at bay. Which is basically what they do, because they handle this wolf thing on their own. Instead of dragging Trouble into this, which Nick really does not like doing, he goes to Monroe and Rosalie, because obviously they think it's Blutbad, and as Monroe informs them, it's actually a cousin of the Blutbads of South American origin called the Luison. So, cry wolf, cry Luison. And so Monroe volunteers to, spy on this guy and, use his nose to see if the scent of a Luison is in his house and if it is in fact the husband that is trying to make his wife crazy. Turns out he's totally right, because Monroe goes super spy, and he's really funny. Like, look at this. Inching himself into places, sniffing around, and being really sneaky. He finds the suits, the 3 different identical suits. He starts getting, some intel, but then, of course, somebody drives up in the driveway, and he's like, holy crap, the guy's home. And he's like, Nick and Hank, you were supposed to tell me when he was coming home. And Nick and Hank are like, what are you drinking? We're standing right in front of him. He's here at the courthouse. What are you talking about, Monroe? And so he's got to make a quick getaway. So Super Spy Monroe, jumps out the window and hangs from the rafters until he, runs away. But it turns out they suspect, oh my gosh, it was twins. There's obviously more than one in on this crazy scheme. So they decide to stake out the house and trap these twins. And it turns out, holy crap, there's another one. There's 3. And Monroe's like, oh man, that is a litter. And they all vogue at the same time. So it turns out it's Gabriel's brothers, Julio, and I think the other one is Mateos. They've all been, going on this psychological scheme to try to get Ava crazy enough to start talking to her doctor and admitting that she's seeing this wolf every day. She's crazy. She needs to go away. The brothers get all the money. So luckily, they're able to incarcerate them without exposing the Vesson with the mask that they had to search for. I mean, seriously, they went to 3 different stores looking for a good wolf mask. By the end, they're all clinking glasses at Monroe and Rosalie's and celebrating their victory over the Luison. Nick's just kind of depressed about the whole thing, and he's just like, man, it would be so easy just to go away with Juliet and not have to deal with any of these Vesson. It's kind of like a Monroe and Nick conversation, kind of like the old days when Nick would just vent to Monroe about his Vesson troubles, and Monroe would just sit there and listen or give his offhand advice. But it's kind of like a really serious friendship thing, which I really like those kind of conversations between Nick and Monroe, because they have a very strong friendship that is based on, their nature and who they really are. It's a very honest relationship. And so Nick admits to Monroe, I liked being a Grimm, and I'm pissed that it's taken away from me. And Monroe's surprised, but of course he's interrupted by a toast. And so they start celebrating until the blaze of fire interrupts their celebrations. And they go outside, and oh my gosh, it's back. The Wolfsangel, it's back, and it's being burned on their front lawn. It's like a burning cross, but Vesson. And Monroe and Rosalie are terrified because they know what this means, and they're like, oh my god, it's because we got married. This is terrible. Oh my god, now they're burning things on their lawns. It's not just a brick through the window. This is serious stuff. And, Hank's ready to call it in and getting the hose and getting this fire out. The music is growing. The flames are ablazing. Juliet goes to Nick. I'm ready. I can do this. You need to be a Grimm again. End of episode. So it's Monroe and Rosalie being threatened that makes Juliet realize that we need to help our friends. We need Nick as a Grimm again. Next week we will see if Juliet can go through with this, and we will see if Nick and Juliet sleeping together after taking the potion will in fact bring Nick his powers back, because these guys in the masks, they are going down. You threaten Monroe and Rosalie, you got a Grimm coming after you.